The vast void of space lay ahead of Ethan Carter as he piloted his cargo ship, the Celestial Traveler, toward the looming silhouette of Cosmos Outpost. The station's metallic spires glimmered under the light of a nearby star, a cold welcome to the weary space trucker. Ethan's calloused hands gripped the controls, his face a mask of focus. Celestial Traveler to Cosmos Outpost Control. Requesting docking clearance, he said, his voice rough from lack of use. A crackle of static followed by a terse response came through. Clearance granted, Celestial Traveler. Proceed to Bay 7. As Ethan maneuvered the ship into the docking bay, a sense of unease settled over him. It had been 5 years since he lost his son, Alex, but the pain remained as fresh as ever. Each new station, each new face, reminded him of what he had lost. The Celestial Traveler shuddered as it docked. Ethan powered down the systems, his movements mechanical, born of years of repetition. He grabbed his worn leather jacket and headed for the airlock. The station's air hit him like a wall, recycled, stale, with an undercurrent of something acrid. Ethan's nose wrinkled. "What's that smell?" he muttered. A nearby dock worker overheard him. "Disinfectant," the man said, his eyes darting nervously. "After the epidemic, can't be too careful." Ethan's eyebrows furrowed. "Epidemic?" The worker looked at him incredulously. "You haven't heard? Wiped out an entire alien species, the Intuits. The station's been on edge ever since." Ethan nodded, absorbing the information. He had been in deep space for months, cut off from galactic news. "Thanks for the heads up," he said, shouldering his way past the worker. As he navigated the station's winding corridors, Ethan noticed the tension in the air. Beings of various species huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Others hurried along, eyes downcast, avoiding contact. Reaching the cargo bay, Ethan began the tedious process of unloading. As he maneuvered a hover cart loaded with crates, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, squinting into the shadows between stacks of containers. For a moment, he thought he saw a pair of eyes, large, luminous, and unmistakably alien. Then they were gone. Ethan shook his head, attributing it to fatigue, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Hours later, as he was finishing up, he heard a soft noise behind him. Ethan spun around, his hand instinctively going to the blaster at his hip. There, half hidden behind a crate, was a small figure. A child, he realized with a start, but not human. The girl's skin was a pale blue, her eyes enormous and iridescent. She stared at him with a mixture of fear and hope. "Hey there," Ethan said, his voice softer than intended. "You lost, kid?" The girl took a tentative step forward. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Help me." Ethan felt a twinge in his chest, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He pushed it down. "Look, I'm not the guy you want. Where are your parents?" The girl's eyes welled with tears. "Gone. All gone. I'm alone." Ethan's mind raced. An alien child alone on the station, the epidemic, the Intuits. It all clicked into place. "You're one of them, aren't you? An Intuit?" She nodded, taking another step closer. "My name is Lyra. Please, take me with you. I can feel your kindness, your loss. We can help each other." Ethan took an involuntary step back. "Whoa, hold on. I don't know what you think you're feeling, kid, but you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a trucker. I can't help you." Lyra's face fell, but she persisted. "You've lost someone too. I can feel it. Your son?" "Enough." Ethan snapped, his voice echoing in the cavernous cargo bay. Lyra flinched, and Ethan immediately regretted his outburst. He softened his tone. "Look, I'm sorry about what happened to your people, but I can't get involved. You need to find someone else to help you." Ethan turned and walked away, ignoring the ache in his chest. He could feel Lyra's eyes on him as he left, but he didn't look back. Over the next few days, as Ethan went about his business on the station, he found himself haunted by thoughts of the alien girl. He'd catch glimpses of her in crowds, always watching him from afar. Each time, she'd disappear before he could approach her. On his third day at Cosmos Outpost, Ethan found himself in a dingy bar, nursing a glass of synthetic whiskey. The bartender, a grizzled Arcturian with 4 arms, was wiping down the counter. "You look like a man with troubles," the bartender observed. Ethan snorted. "Who isn't these days?" The Arcturian shrugged his upper set of shoulders. "Fair point. But you've got that look. Seen something you wish you hadn't?" Ethan hesitated, then decided he had nothing to lose. "What do you know about the Intuits? The ones who died in the epidemic?" The bartender's eyes narrowed. "Nasty business, that. Why do you ask?" "I think I saw one. A survivor. A kid." The Arcturian leaned in close. "Listen, friend, if you did see one, forget about it. Those that are left, they're dangerous. That empathy thing of theirs, it's not natural. They get in your head, make you feel things you don't want to feel. Best to stay away." Ethan nodded, but he couldn't shake the image of Lyra's pleading eyes from his mind. As he left the bar, a commotion down the corridor caught his attention. A group of rough-looking humans and aliens were gathered in a circle, jeering and shouting. Ethan's instincts told him to walk away, but something drew him closer. He pushed through the crowd, his heart sinking as he saw what had drawn their attention. In the center of the circle lay Lyra, curled into a ball, her small body shaking with sobs. One of the men, a burly human with a shaved head, was drawing back his foot for another kick. Without thinking, Ethan surged forward. He caught the man's foot mid-swing, using the momentum to throw him off balance. The man stumbled, crashing into his companions. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ethan growled, positioning himself between Lyra and her attackers. The shaved man regained his footing, his face contorted with rage. "Stay out of this, old man. That thing is a menace. It should have died with the rest of its kind." Ethan's hand hovered near his blaster. "She's just a kid. Back off now." For a tense moment, Ethan thought the man would attack, but something in his eyes must have given him pause. With a final sneer, he spat on the ground and walked away, his companions trailing behind him. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan knelt beside Lyra. She was bruised and bloody, but her eyes were fixed on him with a mix of gratitude and wonder. "You came," she whispered. Ethan felt something crack inside him, a wall he'd built years ago beginning to crumble. He gently helped Lyra to her feet. "Yeah, kid, I came. Let's get you patched up." As they walked away together, Ethan knew his life had just become infinitely more complicated. But for the first time in years, he felt a spark of something he'd thought long dead: hope. Commander Thorne's office was a stark, utilitarian space, much like the man himself. Ethan stood at attention, his face a mask of neutrality as Thorne paced behind his desk. "Mr. Carter," Thorne said, his voice clipped and cold, "I understand you've had an encounter with our station's unwelcome guest." Ethan's jaw tightened. "If you mean the child who was being beaten in the streets, then yes." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "That child, as you call it, is a dangerous anomaly, the last of a species that should by all rights be extinct. Its presence here is a threat to the safety and stability of this station." "She's just a kid," Ethan countered, struggling to keep his voice level. "Scared and alone. How is that a threat?" Thorne slammed his palm on the desk, causing Ethan to flinch. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Carter. The Intuits aren't like us. Their abilities, they can manipulate emotions, influence decisions. Who knows what that creature is capable of?" Ethan thought of Lyra's trembling form, the fear in her eyes. It didn't square with Thorne's dire warnings. "So what do you want from me?" he asked. "Stay away from it," Thorne said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Complete your business here and leave. Forget you ever saw the Intuit." Ethan nodded, though his mind was already made up. "Understood, Commander." As he left Thorne's office, Ethan felt the weight of the station's eyes on him. Rumors of his defense of Lyra had spread, and now he was marked, not just by the authorities, but by those who shared Thorne's fear and hatred of the Intuit girl. Ethan returned to the small quarters he'd been assigned during his stay on the station. Lyra was there, perched on the edge of the cot, her wide eyes watching the door anxiously. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. "Ethan!" she exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "I was afraid." "Shoo," Ethan said gently, closing the door behind him. "It's okay, kid. I'm here. Lyra's eyes shone with unshed tears. Thank you for saving me. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, unsure of how to respond. I couldn't just stand by, he said finally. But you've got to understand, people here are scared of you. They think you're dangerous. Lyra's expression crumpled, and she looked down at her feet. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want a family. Ethan's heart twisted painfully. The wall inside him crumbled a little more. Look, I can't promise you much, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I can get you off this station. Take you somewhere safe. Lyra looked up, hope rekindling in her eyes. Really? Yeah, Ethan said, more certain now. Really? But we have to be careful. We'll need a plan. They spent the next few hours huddled together, devising a way to get Lyra past the station's security. Ethan's mind whirred with logistics and potential risks, but he couldn't ignore the growing warmth in his chest, the sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Alex's death. Finally, as the station's artificial night cycle began, Ethan stood. Okay, kid. It's time. Lyra nodded, determination etched on her small face. Together, they made their way through the station's labyrinthine corridors, avoiding security patrols and bypassing checkpoints. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline heightening his senses. At last, they reached the docking bay where the celestial traveler awaited. Ethan hurried to the ship's controls, initiating the launch sequence. As the engines roared to life, he felt a sense of urgency, of being on borrowed time. Just as the docking clamps released, a group of security officers burst into the bay, weapons drawn. Halt! One of them shouted. Ethan ignored them, his focus on getting Lyra to safety. The ship lurched forward, breaking free of the station. As they soared into the void, Ethan glanced at Lyra. Her eyes were wide with wonder, her fear momentarily forgotten. We did it, she breathed, awe in her voice. Yeah, Ethan said, allowing himself a small smile. We did. As the stars stretched out before them, Ethan felt a quiet sense of triumph, a feeling that, maybe, just maybe, they could build something new together. A family. As the celestial traveler slipped into the vastness of space, Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He set the autopilot and turned to Lyra, who was still glued to the window, her face illuminated by the stars. All right, kid, Ethan said, settling into the seat beside her. Now what? Lyra turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. Now we find somewhere safe. Somewhere we can call home. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. The galaxy was vast, and there were plenty of remote worlds where they could disappear, far from the prying eyes of the authorities and those who feared Lyra's abilities. As they traveled through hyperspace, Ethan and Lyra spent their days talking. Lyra shared stories of her people, the Intuits, and their empathic abilities. Ethan listened, fascinated, as she described how her kind had once lived in harmony, using their powers to foster understanding and peace. What happened? Ethan asked one evening, as they sat in the ship's small galley, sharing a meal. Lyra's expression grew somber. Fear, she said simply. People didn't understand us. They thought we could control them, make them do things against their will. When the epidemic came, it was easy for them to turn a blind eye. Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry, he said softly, for what you've been through. Lyra looked up, her eyes meeting his. It's okay. I have you now. Her words warmed Ethan's heart, and he reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Yeah, you do. Their journey took them to the far reaches of the galaxy, to planets untouched by civilization, where they could start anew. Finally, after weeks of travel, they found a small, lush world on the outskirts of a forgotten star system. It was a place of endless forests and clear blue skies, where the air was sweet and life moved at its own pace. Ethan set the celestial traveler down in a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering trees and the gentle hum of nature. As the ramp descended, Lyra raced down, her laughter echoing through the air. Ethan followed, watching as she twirled in the sunlight, her face alight with joy. What do you think? He called out. Lyra paused, taking in the beauty around her. It's perfect, she said, her voice filled with awe. Ethan grinned, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Together, they began to build a life, crafting a home from the land and finding solace in each other's company. As time passed, Ethan found himself healing. Lyra's presence filled the void left by his son's death, and he discovered a new purpose in caring for her, in helping her grow and learn. One evening, as they sat by a crackling fire, Lyra looked up at the stars. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. Ethan considered her question, his gaze following hers to the endless expanse above. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I wouldn't trade this for anything." Lyra smiled, leaning against him. "Me neither." Their days were filled with simple joys, exploring the land, learning from each other, and forging a bond that was as strong as any family. Ethan taught Lyra how to pilot the ship, passing on his knowledge of the stars and the skills he'd honed over years of travel. In return, Lyra shared her empathic gifts, helping Ethan to confront the grief and pain he'd carried for so long. With her help, he found a way to let go of the past and embrace the future. Together, they discovered the power of hope and the strength that came from love. They were no longer alone in the universe. They had each other, and that was enough. And so, on a distant world, far from the chaos and fear that had once threatened to tear them apart, Ethan and Lyra found what they had been searching for: a family and a place to call home.